Welcome to the FMCG, guys. I'm Daniel. Hi, Christina. How are you?
Hi, Daniel. I'm doing well. How are you today?
Very good, very good. So, very excited about the conversation we're going to have today. Our guest today is Olga Loskutova, who's joining us from Milan, working at appliances leader Whirlpool. Christina, what are your expectations? What do you want to talk about today?
Olga seems like a very interesting person, right? She's worked in a lot of big companies, starting her career in Nestlé all those years ago. But what I'm particularly interested in hearing more from her side would be, first of all, her international experiences. She's worked in so many countries, from Russia to Poland, Czech, US. Now she's in Italy, right? So I would be really keen to understand how she's managing all those changes from a cultural perspective as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first time that Olga appeared on my radar was, I think she was still at Nestlé or moving into SABMiller. So if anyone looks at her LinkedIn profile, you'll see like in that amount of time in the last 9-10 years, how many moves she's made in very interesting P&L roles. I think that one other thing that we are curious about, Christina, is the fact that she's not only now an executive, but she also serves as a non-executive, right?
Right, so this board experience adds a lot to the mix for sure. And I'm very keen to understand what her experience being a woman in all those parts of the world has been.
Yeah, so to talk about P&L management, international moves, and also the advantages, opportunities, but also the difficulties of being a woman and double diverse woman in an executive position. These are things that we'll cover in this conversation.
I'm Olga Loskutova. I live in Milan, Italy. My last position is Vice President for Product and Brand Marketing in Whirlpool Corporation, and I am on the board of the game development company GDF.
You've come to this role like Vice President, which is a really big role, but you have a very long career behind you. Would you mind taking it back a bit and, tell us a little bit, what has your journey been? How has it shaped you and got you to where you are today?
No, absolutely. So I have been working in consumer goods multinationals across Eastern and Western Europe, the US and the Middle East for almost 25 years, so a long time. I started in marketing and sales and moved to general management quite early in my career. I worked for Nestlé for 13 years. That's the company that became my second alma mater. That's the company where I moved to general management, but also the company where I started my international career. Leaving Russia in 2010, and since then moving 7 times and working in 6 different countries. Then in 2014, I joined SABMiller to run Western European cluster. I was lucky to lead the team through 2 consecutive acquisitions. So first we were acquired by P&amp, and then the European division was acquired by Asahi, the Japanese company. And then in 2017, I joined Whirlpool, first as the leader of Central Eastern European cluster, so-called Cluster East, that consisted of 24 countries. And there the team and I were on the mission of transforming the business from being very sell-in, trade partner-oriented, to sell-out and consumer-focused. So I really, really enjoyed that journey. Then I moved to the US, and there, on top of my usual operational and commercial responsibilities, I also became responsible for innovations, R&D, and product development. And in January last year, I came back to Europe to take my current position, my last position.
So a lot of moves there, obviously, Olga, and I think that's something that as a headhunter and as we've developed the relationship over the years, I mean, if I think about it, I think that when we first spoke, you were in Poland, and since then you've been in Czech Republic, Poland again, US now, and now Italy. But looking back at it, how has it been to be international, to do all these international moves? The first of which was moving to Minsk, Belarus in 2010. What's that taught you, and what are the benefits?
Well, there are a lot of benefits. international exposure, international career is a lot of fun, really. And it can give you a lot. You can really flex your style. You can have an opportunity to work with very, very different teams. It can broaden your horizons tremendously. But also, if not done properly, it can hurt you and it can damage your career. So you should be really careful. So yes, it can give you a lot. But as all good things, it comes at a price. So you really need to make it right. And what I mean by making it right, you need to pay attention to the cultural component because it's super, super important to find your way to adjust to different cultures. And if I can elaborate on this a bit, so definitely there are a lot of great books that each of us can read. And by the way, the last one that I read, I really, really liked it by Erin Meyer, The Culture Map. So really good one. Mm-hmm. But also I did it in Poland and the US, but also in Italy. There are always like 1-2 days courses, like, fast training to introduce you to the culture. So I always recommend to executives when they move somewhere, really invest their time and take this course. It can help you with many, many mistakes.
Olga, where do you find these courses? Would that be something that the company offers or like an external vendor consultant? How can someone find a course like that?
Yeah. In my particular case, I was lucky because the company offered it. So It was kind of part of the package for all executives who moves. So that's a normal, let's say, practice for Whirlpool. So definitely ask your companies. And if companies can't help or it's not a usual practice, I think that it's a good idea probably to invest into it by yourself.
This is a very good idea, and that's a tip that I haven't heard before. And I totally identify with what you've said. I've also worked with many different countries, especially in the region of Eastern Europe, but also in a global role, right? And in those cases, the communication style especially, it can be so misinterpreted depending on the culture, the people you speak with, how direct or indirect they are with what they are saying. Do you have any stories that particularly, stand out in your mind where you remember like, oh my God, really, this conversation has been not on the same page from all parties here?
Oh, yeah. I've got actually a lot of stories, but probably before going there, you are touching a very good point because it can lead to huge misunderstanding if you do not understand the culture and you do not understand the differences between it. And there are different components, how the cultures are different. One of them, for instance, is direct-indirect, as you have just mentioned. Mm-hmm. Some cultures are very direct in the feedback, negative feedback included, like Russia, by the way, like Germany, like many countries in Eastern Europe. And many Western European cultures and the US are very indirect. And by the way, when I was in the US with Whirlpool, it was Michigan. So Michigan is super indirect within indirect America. So it's kind of indirect within indirect. So you should be really, really careful. And it can cause a huge misunderstanding. Because if, for instance, you are coming from a direct culture and you say things as they are, it can be so harsh for people, they will not hear you. They will not understand you. It will be like, for them, like a bit of a shock, and they will not be able to proceed it. And vice versa, if you come to a culture with a very, let's say, direct approach, and you are very indirect, people can assume that you are not an honest person, or you hide something, and they can't really trust you. So you can really need to understand whom you talk and who you are, by the way, also. The second important component is low context, high context. Is another one that I can see, how it can damage or communication pretty heavily. And what we mean by it, high context cultures are the cultures where you people assume that you know things. You understand the context. You have the shared clues. You don't really need to be explicit. You don't need to explain. People understand. So, and these cultures are like France, for instance, or Italy. They are, by the way, Russia as well. Mm-hmm. They're extremely high context. You assume things.
Spain as well, yeah.
Spain as well, yeah. And if you face a culture that is low context, that is very explicit in its communication, like, by the way, the US, you can assume that they treat you as a kid or they think that you are stupid. So, and that's kind of another thing. And by the way, the biggest trick is when one in kind of high context culture talks to another high context culture, both people assume that we understand, but they understand things totally differently. So that's the moment where you really need to make sure that, we understand what we're talking about. And I remember that I had an amazing story in the US. It was one of the first meetings when I moved there on big and important project. And it was like $10 million project, really big one, important one. And we had a status review. And it was very, very important for us to launch the project on time. And we went through kind of all details where we are on this kind of technical status on that. And at some point of time, a guy said something, okay, here we have kind of little thing, but that's okay. We know what to do about it. We have plans, so it's kind of okay. It's as per plan. And he continued. So after the meeting, I felt really, really good. So everything was okay. Everything was on time. So I left the meeting. 30 minutes later, I had a one-to-one with one of my people in my team. And I asked, okay, what do you think about the meeting? And by the way, good thing that I asked. And the guy told me, it's a disaster. I don't know what we're going to do about it. And I said, what a disaster. But you heard it. He told you. He told me that everything is on track and to understand what to do and to have a plan, and it's a very minor thing. But that was not really the message. So that was kind of, you can really understand things totally differently.
It's when you have to really read behind the lines, right? And understand what's the message behind the message.
Absolutely. And especially, again, when we're talking about high context culture, that's exactly about it. You need to look for meaning, not for words. You really need kind of to read between the lines. And probably, you shouldn't afraid to ask questions. Probably indirectly, after the meeting, probably you can use some other people, but do not be afraid to ask questions and clarify.
Yeah, so that would be basically, because I was thinking, like, how do you solve that? So that's probably the right way to approach it, not to ask questions. And probably you have to approach questions in a way that it feels like open and not confrontational, as well. Probably in all contexts, Maybe actually, if you see that people are more direct, you can be more direct. But if not, maybe open questions is the way to go. Or what do you think?
I think that over the time, you really learned to look for some clues. For instance, in the US context, I really learned to look for something like, okay, there is little thing here, and I'm becoming immediately alerted. Or there is like one thing that I would like to mention. So you need to kind of to look for it. And yes, absolutely ask questions. Stay close to people. Always have somebody whom you can rely on and trust, who can be kind of your translator. I always try to find people from the culture whom I can ask and double check the understanding. But look for clues. Be very, very attentive. And that's why, by the way, I'm saying that it's a great opportunity to flex your style, because you're becoming so attentive, so observant. It can be super helpful for your personal development.
You've unpacked a lot of things here, and I'm sure that they all come with the challenges of moving to a different country. And you started this journey of going abroad and working internationally quite early on, where, not everybody was on Zoom like we are right now. And it wasn't as easy to be connected all the time around the globe. So I really want to ask you, from your personal life, how could you manage this? How challenging was it? And did you have any mechanisms, like for cultures here, you said you find your own translator, you're looking for clues, you adapt a little bit. But what do you do when you get home in the afternoon and you found yourself in a whole different country once again?
I think that it's very, very important from the very beginning to make sure that you and your family are properly settled. So that's the first thing. You need to make sure that your family is comfortable and you have all your support system around you, including doctors for kids, for instance, manicure for me, and all important things. And for me, sometimes I have this analogy as Lego. Every time when I come to another country, as a Lego, I construct my world around myself, again. Then I deconstruct it, I move to another country, and I construct it again. So you need to build this support system around you. And you need to support your kids as well, because kids are different. I have 2 kids. One of them, my older daughter, she's super agile. She can kind of thrive and survive in absolutely any culture. My son is much more reserved, so I really need to help him to adjust. And for kids, it's a great thing, definitely, because they have the opportunity to meet a lot of people. It's great for their development, but at some point of time, it's becoming difficult because they can start losing friends. So and especially when they're a bit older, it's becoming tough. So, as with all, things, you have pros, you have cons, and you need to understand how you will benefit from pros as much as possible and how you will manage cons.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm sure, actually, does it become easier to move in the years, with all these moves that you've made? Does it make it easier?
It's easier from the technical standpoint. I really have kind of an algorithm right now. I know what I need to do, but also it's becoming tiring. So at some point of time, there is a desire just to settle down.
Yeah, which makes sense. I guess that it depends where you are in that moment, if you want to settle down or not. So Olga, one thing that obviously is like something that I really like about your profile is the fact that you've had P&L responsibilities since very early on, really, in your career, even before you left Russia, and then you took on very early on a general management role, which means P&L, it means people management. And that's normally the way to go, right, in a career when you want to reach the C-level. Unfortunately, though, you're one of the, I don't know a few, but the minority of females that are in that type of responsibility, and even more so an Eastern European in a Western company having that type of responsibility. In case you're wondering where I want to take this, it's basically, just to reflect on diversity in corporations, like where are we right now, and why is this still an exception on both fronts?
Mm-hmm. First, I really believe that all of us should be super passionate about the diversity, because it's a great stuff. It's great stuff from all standpoints. It's great for shareholders because it's proved that the financial and business results are better. It's really great for employees because when, again, it's the data, when we have women in the executive teams, the culture is more inclusive. And it's also great for consumers because the majority of consumer decisions are made by women. So if women are underrepresented in the top management of the company, you can easily miss the point. So we all should be super passionate, and definitely I'm very, very passionate about it. And the good news is that we are making progress. We can be proud of quite nice progress we are making, especially in the support functions. We have more and more women right now in finance, in HR, in other support functions, legal. We still have a great opportunity to bring more women to P&L, to decision-making and P&L roles, because that's the people who set the tone. If we don't have women there, again, the whole exercise is becoming a bit artificial. And it's challenging. And you mentioned this double diversity thing. It's also true that we are more successful with more, let's say, Western European, American women on the top versus women from minorities. And by minority, I mean Black women, I mean Latin American women, but also I mean Eastern European women. And I believe that these women from the developing world, they can bring a lot to corporations. They're very agile, they're very hardworking, they're very entrepreneurial. They can really, really bring a lot. But they need to have more opportunities, more possibilities. And probably the third area where we have a great opportunity, where we can still should make progress, is inclusion. Because one thing is to bring a woman to the executive team. The second thing is to make sure that she has a voice. And I have observed it many times when women technically are in the boardroom, in the decision-making room, but they don't really have a voice, or they should be so careful and they try so hard to be very indirect that their voice is lost.
It is the difference between giving someone a seat at the table and then making sure that everyone in the table is being heard and they have the opportunity to speak, right?
Absolutely.
You did mention, Olga, that there is a lot of progress. Of course there is. We've gone a long way. Still, how far below where we're supposed to be we are? I read recently that during 2023, in the S&P 500 CEOs, the number of women CEOs finally outnumber the number of male CEOs named John. So just the people who are male and named John are now fewer than the number of women CEOs. So for sure, there is a lot of still room for growth, let's say, to get to a more equal place when it comes to decision-making, to P&L accountability, to executive decisions. I was wondering, apart from inclusion, which is something that you mentioned, when it comes to really pushing the agenda for diversity, what would be some areas where you think we need to be focusing right now to keep making some progress?
I would probably focus on the two things. The first one, it's really more about our mindset and our biases. And all of us, by the way, I do include women here as well. Men and women, especially men and women on the top positions. We really appreciate the power of diversity, and we do a cautious effort every day to manage our biases. We all want to believe or even believe that we don't have them. We do. Every single one of us. All of us will have our biases. And I catch myself with my biases, quite frequently. So we need to make a cautious effort to manage it. And why I say that we should include women as well, it's about both men and women, because ironically, still we can't really say that women support other women. We can do much more for each other. And it's becoming much better right now, but I still remember times when it was much more challenging to have a female boss versus a male one, because there was very, very rare women who arrived at the top positions. They were very strong. They were very, sometimes they worked extremely hard, and they were not in a position to support other women. It's changing right now. And me personally, I have a lot of examples now around me of a great support from executive women. So that's the first area. And the second area is, I guess all of us still need to understand it a bit more. We're not talking about it a lot. It's about how we can teach women this language that is used in the boardrooms, that they can use as well, they can employ as well to be heard. Because the business and corporations, as we know them, started many years ago, and they started by men. And men created the language that we still use. So the rules of the game in the boardroom have been written by men. And they're not so obvious to women. And sometimes we are very misleading because we teach women, you know what? You need to do your job, you need to have great results, and you will be fine. No, you will not be fine. So we should take it probably in a way that your results and your good job is the baseline. You must have it to be in the game, but it's definitely not enough to win the game. So you must have the results, but also you must understand the language or the rules of the game, including building the network, building the sponsorship, gaining the voice that is heard. I don't want to use the word power because power is very often kind of, is not considered as a good word in many cultures. But basically, yes, it's about how women can gain the power to be heard and to have their point of view. And then it's also about confidence. Confidence to be there and to share your view. Understanding that to get here, it was not really easy for you and you have a lot to lose. But also understanding that your voice is different. You express yourself differently. You pay attention to different things versus your male peers. And this kind of thing, how we can teach women these invisible rules of the game is probably the most important one.
Yeah.
In my capacity is because I'm also a coach and mentor to some amazing women, I always try to pay a lot of attention to it because for me, it's a deal breaker.
Mm-hmm. Is there something also that women can do more of or that you would advise to get more into P&L roles? And because, it's sad to say, but it's true that when you look at the executive teams of many corporations, well, the woman is the one in HR, right? Which is fantastic, but it would also be great to have them as chief commercial officers or head of regions, which obviously does happen, but it's like such a minority. I mean, what can be done or systemically, but also on own initiative from executive women that are rising through the ranks now? What can they do to get more into that type of role, which, as you said at the beginning, is critical?
It's about the two things that I have just mentioned. It's really managing our biases and helping women to be prepared, because normally P&A responsibility and general management are the most powerful roles in the company. You should really work hard to get them. It's not an easy game. And overall, companies should pay attention to it. And by the way, I believe that we're really making progress. And I have just heard about a company. I don't want to pronounce the name, but it's very, very famous multinational. And they had only women search for one of the European regions. That's the first time when I heard the term only women search. It was amazing. It was really amazing. We should have more examples like this.
So being very intentional about making the change, taking the decision.
Being brought intentionally to the selection process. I think that it's becoming already a bit of a mainstream, that the brief is that I want to see whatever. Let's see the candidates, half of them should be women, or 40% of them should be women. It's becoming...
Can I ask you your opinion on something? I'm actually also part of a couple of leading circles. And I was actually in my group a couple of days ago, and we're having this discussion with other women there. And we've all come back from vacation, and one of them said, I'm really spreading myself thin. I'm taking on way too much stuff, and I cannot really say no. And we're having this discussion about how, as women, sometimes we don't feel comfortable saying no. And probably it's not so much because of our willingness to please or serve, but rather because we have this feeling that we need to be able to do everything. We need to prove that whatever people are giving us at work, yes, we can do it, and we can do it greatly. And we end up with way more stuff that might be less impactful, rather than focusing on the big things that are going to make a difference and help us progress. So we're just having a discussion on that. And I would love to hear your opinion. What would be your thoughts?
Yeah, you are touching a very, very important question. There are two things here. The first one is that, yes, we need to prove that we're excellent. We to some extent, yes, we have to be perfect. We need to work harder to prove that we're good. And for this, we are doing literally everything that we're asked. It's very difficult for us to refuse. There is the other thing here. We want to be liked. Yeah. And this constant, tension between the desire to be liked and the need to be respected is a tough one. And very often we go more to this, like to one. It's very difficult for us to be in a situation where we are not, we have a chance of not being liked.
Yeah. And I think that's probably something that a lot of people struggle with, saying no is uncomfortable, right? Everybody wants to be liked, but I think that due to different factors, but probably the education, socialization, and so on, it is much more preponderant on women than guys.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really need to say no, and you need to take the risk, because it's about taking the risk to potentially not being liked by some people. But longer run, you will win. Yes, you have a risk to lose in some short-term situations. You may lose. If you are not super comfortable, there will be people who will not really appreciate it, and you can lose quite a lot, actually. But longer run, it's the right strategy. Because only by gaining your space, gaining your voice, of course, together with skills, you can arrive at the position where you really want to be.
Yeah.
Also, yes, it's also about the willingness to take the risk.
Olga, before you said something which I really loved, which was in the lines of teaching women the language of the boardroom. But when we started our conversation with today, we mentioned mostly your corporate experience, right? But you also have some board experience. You're part of the board at Nexters, right? Do you want to say a couple of words there? Because I would love to focus a little bit on your non-executive work, and I'm sure our listeners would be thrilled to hear more.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very, very happy about the opportunity. Nexters is an amazing company. It's a game development company, very international. 1/3 of their sales is in the US, 1/3 is in the Asia, 1/3 in Europe. So they're truly, truly multinational company with amazing, very young people doing very, very big jobs. And it's a wonderful opportunity to learn a lot. And I think that we somehow probably can change our perspective on this a bit, because normally we take the board roles as something that you do after the retirement. Actually, you can benefit a lot from it when you have your executive career, because it's a great opportunity to see how the business is done in other industries, how the business can be done differently. You have much broader corporate perspective on the governance, on the management, on the leadership. So it's a great opportunity to learn. And it's a great opportunity, again, to flex your leadership style and to develop this, again, we talked about it, very indirect leadership style, because non-executive job is very different from the executive job. In the executive job, you should be hands-on. You are the one who does things. You are the one who leads the people. In the non-executive job, you can't really touch it. You watch, you ask questions, but you shouldn't touch it. You should really keep your hands behind your back all the time, because if you start if you start interfering, you can make a lot of damage. So it's a lot about this very indirect style, about asking the right questions, pointing to the right things, helping the team to understand different perspectives. So it's a great tool for women, by the way, as well, to learn this very different leadership style. The trick here is you need to manage this conflict with your executive job. And I know that many companies do not allow for their executives to have these board roles. And if you're lucky and if your company allows you to have it, make sure that you manage the time properly. And probably you can't have more than 1-2 board roles, because otherwise it will be difficult to manage from the time standpoint. Make sure that it doesn't somehow correlate to your executive or conflict with your executive job, and make sure that your boss and your team see the benefits. Because in the mind of the corporation, you are taking something from them. You are taking your attention from them. Make sure that you bring something back.
what are the benefits for like your full-time executive employer of you being in a non-exec position?
Flexing my style, learning this indirect influence, seeing completely different business model, because game development is a different world. And by the way, how they approach marketing, how calculated their marketing is spectacular. They know exactly the cost of every user they acquire, and they have ROI, like very reliable ROI, for all their marketing investments. It's a very different business model versus FMCG and kind of multinational corporations. You can learn really a lot from it.
For sure, you can learn a lot. And to tell you the truth, this has been kind of a black box for me. I've tried actively to learn more about how someone gets on a board. So, Olga, how does this happen? And especially for women. Networking, yes, we need to do more of it. What else is there? How do you know when you're ready? Which company? How you find the company finds you? Tell us more.
It's a journey, and it's not very explicit how exactly you should get there. So I guess the trick is you need first to really understand what you want and why you want it. You need to understand, to educate yourself how boards operate and what benefits you can bring to the board. It's quite probably more obvious for finance people because we have this audit committee and finance people it's kind of no-brainer. And finance people from big corporations. It's probably the easiest for them to be there. For all other functions, you need to understand what value you can bring, knowing how the boards are normally structured. Then you need to start reaching out to some companies who help fulfill board roles. And at some point of time, it can be also very beneficial to get to be educated on this. That's, by the way, what I'm doing right now. This November, I will graduate. I will be certified by INSEAD in international board course. It's
very
also
impressive.
a good idea because it's a profession. It's a profession. You need to be professional.
Yeah, I think the INSEAD program is definitely one of the best, because I mentioned a few people that I know that are on boards have done this exact course. So that's a good one. Yeah.
It's definitely a good one. And the benefit of this program, that it's international. It targets international boards. Or boards of the international companies with the different cultures and nationalities on the board. It's even called International Board Director.
Got it. And Olga, reflecting on all these years of experience, all these P&L roles, all these moves, if you went back to yourself when you were starting your professional career, which I know that you started, I think very young, if I'm not wrong, I think you started working in a corporate when you were 18 or 19, something like that?
Yeah, I started working when I was 18, yes.
Yeah. So what type of advice, what's the one piece of advice you would give yourself back then?
Yeah, I do have this piece of advice, and I think that it's very relevant for many women. I would probably tell myself, many, many years ago, relax, enjoy the ride, you will be fine.
This was Olga Loskutova. Very inspiring conversation, Christina, no?
For sure, she didn't disappoint, Daniel. And with all her experiences moving across different countries and different cultures, I think she mentioned a lot of things that would resonate with our listeners that have moved around.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that I thought was fascinating and extremely useful was the fact of taking culture classes on arrival, no?
Yes, and that was actually something that I hadn't heard of before, and I'm not really sure or aware of how many companies are actually offering this, but it seems like a really good tip. As the first thing you need to do, as you mentioned, is to really make sure that you adjust culturally. I really like how she mentioned the differences in different nuances in culture and in communication.
Yeah.
The first being the more indirect countries versus the more direct ones.
Yeah.
And then the second one, which I hadn't thought of before, to be honest, was the low context versus high context. I found it to be particularly true when I think of interactions I've had with various cultures in the past.
No, absolutely. And it's also, I think that high and low context, as you said, it's something that's not that talked about, but it's like the difference of being literal and not necessarily being literal when you talk and you understand things, right? So it's like, I don't know, like in Southern Europe, well, maybe not Southern Europe, maybe that's a generalization. Maybe here in Barcelona, I would say everybody is a Barca fan, but that doesn't literally mean everybody. It means like it's a generalization. It's probably like 70% of people, right? But everyone would understand here that everybody doesn't literally mean everybody, right?
This is true, but I also like her approach on how people assume that you know something when you enter a meeting, and how specifically if you have two people entering from two different, both high context countries and cultures, they would both assume that the other person understands what they're saying, and they might not end up having a solid result where everyone has agreed and they know what they've agreed on.
Yeah. No, that's right. Well, I think that our listeners will learn a lot from that. What about for you, Christina? Maybe you can talk more to this than me. As a woman, any like takeaways that you will take from this conversation from someone that's had like this P&L experience, which, as we've said, unfortunately, it's still uncommon to see women in these type of roles?
For sure. I would say, Olga spoke a bit about our mindset and how we need to set that. That's something that we would expect to hear, right? And how we all need to start working on our biases, first by understanding them, realizing that we do have biases, and then start working on them. But the second part, as I said, which was, I think she mentioned, we need to teach women the language that's being spoken in the boardrooms. I really love that. And indeed, there is a system that we need to navigate, which has been built by a predominantly male world in the past years. So we really need to start understanding what the rules of the games are. And that also connects a little bit with how we operate in our daily lives when it comes to our work, how we are really struggling to say no, we're trying to do all the things. We really need to understand, how do people speak about the different challenges at work? What are the important things that would be the highlights or the lowlights, or the ones that will make the biggest impact, and where we need to be focusing on how to communicate about them?
And I think it was interesting as well, the fact that she's on the board of a gaming company, which is very different to her past experience, but that's a bit what board roles are about, getting an external point of view on things.
It's about getting that broader perspective, as you mentioned, about understanding other industries and gaining the insight. Also, you are a diverse voice in a board, right? When you come from a completely different environment, so that you can offer your own perspective. And on top of that, it is about a completely different leadership style. When you're non-executive, Olga also mentioned you're not executing things yourself. So how do you get comfortable with that? How do you figure out what is the right leadership style in order to be able to influence outcome rather than produce it?
Yeah. Well, and it's no more the discourse about it, because how do you measure what good looks like in a role like that? Well, we have to kind of learn that, I think.
For sure, you have to learn that. I love that she's actually taking a course on international board directors, right? That's what she mentioned. So I think it's the 70-20-10 rule. 70% you will have to learn on the job eventually. 20% find out other people, find people like Olga who can speak to you and give you their experiences, share, and then you get the learnings. But there is this 10% where you need to stay at home and read a book, go figure out what course might be applicable for you to broaden your perspective into how you're going to approach this kind of new job, and you figure out what good looks like for you.
Yeah, which makes me think it's a good idea. With something that we can talk about another day as well, like the importance of having like role models and mentors in a career, no? That's something that we should talk about more. Well, thanks, Christina, again for being here with me today. Thanks for our listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you probably next week in the next episode of the FMCG Guys. Have a great day.